Here is a question 5. A question 5 you might have attempted in class. A question 5 answer of which you may be looking at right now. On the website here is where you can find all the information that you need in order to answer this question, including this exam guide of how to answer these types of questions. Follow the guide, man! For the purposes of this little guide, we're going to use this plan. You would never have time to plan things in quite perhaps this much detail in your exam, but a plan's always a good idea. So let's delve in. Remember, you can pause, rewind whenever you need to, but I don't want to go on for too long, so I'm going to talk fairly fast. Here's why the plan looks like it does. You need a paragraph on support for the hypothesis and a paragraph that goes against the hypothesis before you get to a conclusion. Starting with evidence for the idea that the morale in Britain was high during the Second World War, you've got this picture of a postman continuing to deliver mail despite all the destruction around him. That in itself is evidence that there was relatively high morale, at least in Britain during the Second World War. We'll put it in our little plan. Look, here it is in the plan. You can pause it if you want, anytime. Here's source E. Is there any evidence that morale was high in this source? No, there isn't, so we'll skip it and we'll move on. And so let's look at source F. Well, source F says, as long as there were men and women to continue production, the country's economic life could continue. Attendance at work remained surprisingly good, and specifically it says morale remained high. The fact that people were still continuing to turn up to work suggests that morale hadn't collapsed completely, and it literally says morale remained high. So there's some evidence that morale did remain high during the Second World War. Let's put it in our plan. Here it is in our plan. But we better make a quick look back at the guide to make sure we've not missed anything. If we missed anything, oh God, we might miss something here because it says, make sure you use your own knowledge. Say what? I said use your own knowledge because look, you can't get more than 10 marks if you don't use your own knowledge. You can't even get to 8 marks. You'll only get 7 if you don't use the sources, but you must make sure you use the own knowledge. Your own knowledge, not the own knowledge. I don't know what the own knowledge is. So here's my own knowledge that the Blitz spirit was encouraged by the government, and there must have been some example of Blitz spirit, and certainly people didn't give up really at any point. So make sure you use your own knowledge, or this owl will hunt you down. But we can't just look at evidence for, we must also look at evidence against. So here we go, starting with source A. Source A does not have any evidence against the hypothesis, but the thing that I would bring up if I was an A-star student, I imagine you want to be, is that this is probably an example of government propaganda, because as we've said, the government wanted to encourage this idea of Blitz spirit. Any evidence of low morale would not have been published in the newspapers. So this source, though it does not have evidence against the hypothesis, it is a very questionable source, and I'd point that out in my other paragraph. Here you can see where I would have pointed it out in my other paragraph. Now look at source E. Well, there's loads of stuff here. Look, people run madly for the shelters. Hysterical people. There's all numbers fleeing London's East End. There's all bits of evidence there that morale was certainly far from high. Although there is a bit of a thing you could mention there, that this was from December 1940 when the Blitz had only just started, so perhaps people weren't quite used to it yet as a day-to-day occurrence. And maybe they were less hysterical as the war went on. Maybe you know that from your own knowledge. You do now. Here's 2 bits I would write about from source E. Source F, what we're doing using this one, sir. You use that for the other paragraph, don't worry. Sometimes sources can go in paragraph 1 and in paragraph 2, both for and against. And here is an example, because it says there, understandably there was widespread fear during the Blitz. Widespread fear doesn't sound like high morale to me, although, as we've mentioned before, it does have evidence for and against. Look, here's what I would have written about source F. Oh my God, it's Barry Chuckle. Why is it Barry? What do you want? There's something missing, you say. What could that thing be? Oh God, I remember now. Leave me alone, Owl. Yes, that's right. You will only get 10 marks if you do not use own knowledge. And remember, you'll only get 7 marks if you don't use the sources. And you might be thinking, flipping it, look at the own knowledge that Sir's got here. Well, this is not out of my head. This is out of the textbook, so you've got access to it as well. This is why it's important to make very good notes in your class. This is A-star own knowledge. You can see there, 43,000 civilians have been killed. That does not help morale stay high. And so that goes against the argument. You've got other bits there. What I would recommend to you is you maybe get the textbook and have a look at the Blitz and see if you can get some facts, because if you've got bits like you could just see there on the screen, that's the sort of stuff that an A-star student might say. Specialist knowledge that makes the examiner go, ooh. But you also need a conclusion. Why? Let's have a look at the Marx scheme, where you have to have a sustained argument and evaluation, reviewing alternative views. Oh, look, for and against alternative views, before giving a balanced judgment. Ah, that sounds like a conclusion to me. A balanced judgment. Let's see if we can do one of those. But wait, there's more! If you want to get to the very top, you might take into consideration the strength of the sources when you come to your conclusion. Let's see what I would put. So using my own knowledge, I've decided it's depended on who you were, where you lived, and how terrible your experiences were. But looking at the sources, it also depends on which years you're considering, because the secret report in source E, this is me taking into account the strength of the evidence, is the strongest evidence. This was the information that the government didn't want the public to see because it was a secret report. It shows morale was certainly not high in the beginning of the war. And this is supported by source F. But source F and A show that the British carried on regardless, and though morale wasn't exactly high, it wasn't low either. That's the sort of thing I might have written in my conclusion. I hope this was all useful for you, and don't forget